You may have seen this in other languages, but an array is a container object that stores a sequence of values that are all of the same type. This means it could hold many different values, so we could have an integer array that holds many different integers like 1, 2, 3. However, I could not have an array of integers and strings because an array can only contain data of one particular type. Usually, when we use an array, we not only want to store these values, but we want to be able to access each individual value quickly. Each item in an array is associated with a numerical index starting at 0. So if we have an array with 5 numbers, say 31, 45, 22, 98, and 10 in that order, we can access them by index accordingly. In this example, if we wanted to access 31, we would want to check index 0. For 45, we would check index 1, for 22, index 2, for 98, index 3, and for 10, index 4. Let's try implementing this in code. So the numbers we had before were 31, 45, 22, 98, and 10. To create an int array, we would write int, open square bracket, close square bracket, the variable name, numbers, we'll call it, and this is how we declare an int array. To allocate space for this array in the program, we would need to add equals new int 5. This sets the size of the array to be 5 slots, or 5 slots that can be indexed from 0 to 4. Once you've set the size of the array, you cannot change it or modify it. You can alter what numbers are inside of the array, what ints are inside of the array, but you cannot make the container itself bigger or smaller without creating a new array. So it's very important that you're sure about its size when you create one. Now let's add our items and initialize our array with data. If we wanted to add each number individually, we would write numbers at 0, so accessing that array numbers, accessing slot 0 of that array of ints. And in this case, we're going to go that first number should be 31. We'll do numbers slot 1 equals 45, and then numbers slot 2 equals 22, numbers slot 3 equals 98, numbers slot 4 is 10. In each of these lines of code, we select a slot from the numbers array and set its value to a specific number. Here, the index 0 slot is being set to 31, and so on. We can also declare, allocate space for, and initialize the array in just one line of code. To do this, we can go int array, and we'll have this be a new variable, numbers2, equals, and if we already know what our numbers are going to be, we can put them in right there. So we'll have our first int be 31, 45, 22, 98, and 10. And so this does the declaring, the allocating, and the initializing in one line of code. Before, we had just this piece of code declaring the array, then this entire piece of code that allowed you to declare and allocate, and then you didn't initialize until you hit these 5 lines of code. Now in line 16, we've done the declare, allocate, and initialize in just one line, which is great. Now that we know how to create and initialize an array, let's create one with strings. And so to create one with strings, we go string, open square bracket, close square bracket, and then we're going to make this about my favorite candy bars. And so we're going to go my favorite candy bars. And in this case, we are going to make them Twix, Hershey's, and Crunch. Now to access a value in my favorite candy bars array and print it out, we can write something like system.out.println. We'll say index 1, and then we'll access the array my favorite candy bars at index 1, and that will be printed out. Hit play. And we should get Hershey's because Twix is at index 0, Hershey's at index 1, and that's in fact what we get here in the console. Now let's say we wanted to change the value at index 2 from Crunch to Butterfinger. To do this, we could write my favorite candy bars at index 2. We want to set that to be the value of Butterfinger. Then we could print out what is in fact at index 2. So we'll say index 2. Now that we've changed it, we should get Butterfinger. And running the program, we see, in fact, that it has changed from Crunch to Butterfinger. To see all of the instance methods we can use on this array and all of the properties this array has, we can go my favorite candy bars dot, and all of these things come up. This may not work in all IDEs, but it works if you're using IntelliJ. The most interesting property, and one that you'll use a lot, is called length. The length is the length of the candy bars array. So if we go ahead and print this out, we can go system.out.println length, and we can see what this is, and it should be 3 because we have 3 candy bars in our array. And then adding an ln here so it prints on a new line, we do in fact get 3. To look at the static or class methods for arrays, we simply write out one of the array class names, which is array, and then dot. Here are all the class methods that come with arrays. These are methods that the class, instead of a specific instance or object, calls. One method called get takes an array and index as input. So we're going to give it my favorite candy bars and then the index 2. Notice it's the class calling this, not an instance of the class. And you might get an error here that array is a symbol that's not found. All you have to do is come up here and write import java.lang.reflect.array and get access to that class's static methods. This get method is essentially doing the same thing we did before in our print statements, getting values at a specific index. But a class method rather than an instance method is doing it. So if we go ahead and system.out to print this out, we'll be able to see this in action, and it really does the exact same thing. And here we get Butterfinger again. There's also a class called arrays, which has static methods that you can use to compare, fill, and sort arrays, as well as convert an array to a string. Let's test one out. We could sort our numbers array that we had before up here by going arrays.sort numbers, and this will sort this numbers array that we had up here, and we initialized line by line. And again, if you're getting an error here, just go up to the top and import java.util.arrays. And you'll have access to that arrays class and be able to use the class static methods for that and really be able to sort this numbers array itself. To see what this new numbers array looks like, we can go ahead and print it out. And this method is mutating the numbers array, so it's not returning anything. It's simply going to change the numbers array itself. And the reason it can do this is because it's not changing the size of the array. It's not making the array bigger or smaller. It's simply changing the order of the array's contents, which is something you can do with arrays. Printing out the numbers array, we get a memory address. That's because arrays are a reference type. To see what's actually going on inside of the array, we can use another arrays class method called toString. So we can go arrays.toString, and that input is going to be numbers, our array. And if we print this out, we see, in fact, that the numbers are sorted from least to greatest here in our console. In the next video, we'll look more deeply at data types, data structures, and how we pass objects into functions.